Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's debate. My name is Ella Goulding, and I am the chairman, and Georgina Nemeth is the timekeeper. The adjudicator is Mr. Patrick Moritz. The topic of the debate is that the new grading system is detrimental to students. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Brighton Secondary, and the negative team seated to my left is from St. Aloysius. The speaking time for this debate is 4 minutes. A single warning bell will sound at 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. A continuous bell may be rung 30 seconds after the speaking time, in which case the speaker must sit down immediately. Please switch off your phones and other electronic devices. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Nigella Sammy.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate tonight is that the new grading policy is detrimental to students. We define the new grading policy, in accordance with the article, as the principle of action implemented by Clark County, Nevada, that states that attendance, participation, and late assignments don't matter in schools from preliminary education to middle and secondary school. The policy rules that grades shall not be influenced by behaviour or other non-academic measures, and the new grading system uses a P for pass and W for working below the standard year level. We define detrimental, as outlined by Oxford Dictionary, as tending to cause harm, and define students as school pupils studying in schools affected by the aforementioned grading policy, aged 5 to 18. We, the affirmative team, wholeheartedly know and believe that this statement is true. Today, as first speaker, I will be talking to you about how this policy does not prepare students for society or work. I will also be talking about how students educated in conformity with this system will not be appreciating the value of failure. Our second speaker, Alan, will be talking about the consequences of students being absent in class. He will also be talking about the lack of motivation and its effect on students. Our third speaker, Evelyn, will rebut and sum up our team case. My first point is how this policy does not prepare students for society or work. This is because in workplaces, employees are expected to be punctual, whether that be handing in projects before the deadline or arriving at the job on time. In fact, in a study conducted by Career Builder, 41% of bosses state they would fire someone if they were tardy. In this policy, students are taught to have no regard for timelines or due dates, as the date of the assignment submission would have no impact on the end mark received. But this dismissal of deadlines doesn't correlate to students' future careers. This short-term solution will only hinder them in the long run. Sage Journals published an article in 2019 on the impact of time management to students. Empirical evidence from a 2004 study by Professor Mackenzie and Gow from Sydney University suggests that effective time management is associated with greater academic achievement. So if this academic-oriented system wants to see progress in young minds, structure will have to stay. Now to my second point, that this policy doesn't teach students to appreciate the value of failure. As we've all undoubtedly been told many times in our life, failure is an important part of life that teaches us how to grow and learn. Through several decades of research, Dr. Carol Dweck discovered the way we approach failure and challenges is split into two views, a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. In a growth mindset, people believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through participation, dedication, and hard work. They also believe they can grow through challenges and failures. A growth mindset will not be nurtured in this policy because participation will be disregarded if we focus purely on academic performance. A teacher who will be affected by this policy, Tam Lester, states that these policies are taking away those learner-ready behaviours such as focus and participation. If we praise academic success, as promoted by this new policy, a fixed mindset is encouraged. Praising hard work and effort instead promotes a growth mindset. This new policy will undoubtedly corner children into the fixed mindset, as their destination will be judged as more important than their individual learning journey. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, endorsing this new policy and system in schools demotes all the hard work educators have put into nurturing a growth mindset among the next generation to create more self-aware citizens. There is no reason to continue investing in a system with so many faults. After all, if they're just going to have to relearn other techniques and ideas for future careers, what exactly is the point? Thank you.
I call upon the first negative speaker, Zara Sandi.
Good evening, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for today's debate is that the new grading policy is detrimental for students. We as a negative team believe that this statement is false. We as a negative team believe that the definition of this case is that the new grading policy from US Nevada is not harmful to students. Referencing Cambridge Dictionary, the new grading policy refers to the word grading, which means the process of judging the quality of a product, and the word policy, which is the set of ideas or plans of what to do in situations agreed by a group of people, for the word detrimental with the definition of causing harm or damage. Today, as the first speaker, I will be talking to you about how the COVID-stricken students from US Nevada would benefit from this grading policy, and that these new grading policies will accommodate remote learning. Our second speaker will talk about how the new grading system is more equitable and promotes reflection and reassessment. And lastly, our third speaker will rebut and sum up the case. The first speaker of the affirmative team has tried to tell you, we don't agree with the definition of the affirmative team because according to the Nevada government, there will still be a grade for participation and discipline called a citizenship grade. The first speaker of the affirmative team has tried to tell you that this new grading system does not prepare society for work, and this is wrong because grades are the main source of gaining jobs and getting into good colleges, and therefore into good occupations. I will be discussing 2 points. My first point relates to the impactful growth of COVID-19 cases driven by the Delta variant, triggering behavioural issues such as late or missing assignments, low attendance, and participation. According to Brooks et al. 2020, stress, confusion, and anger are a commonplace because of the pandemic. The WHO 2020b says COVID-19 has the potential to contribute to or exacerbate long-term mental illnesses, including anxiety, depression, PTSD, and substance misuse. Students are certainly not immune to this shock, and as such, the behaviours are intensified under the influence of the pandemic. However, the new policy states that grades shall not be influenced by such behaviours or other non-academic measures. Instead, the grading will focus on what students can demonstrate as to what they know. The new policy will not be harmful to students because it eliminates behavioural factors from the grading and reduces stress and alleviates mental illnesses caused by non-academic measures. In conclusion, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, the new grading system will reduce stress and mental illness amid the pandemic, as well as supporting the distanced learning that is becoming more common as the COVID cases continue.
I now call upon the second affirmative speaker, Alan Halbert.
Madam Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, the topic for tonight's debate is that the new grading policy is detrimental to students. We, the Affirmative team, believe this is completely and utterly true. As our first speaker has already explained, the new grading policy would prepare students for their future, and also the new grading policy would diminish students' ability to learn from their failures. The first native speaker has tried to tell you that the pandemic has affected assignments. However, this is untrue because these assignments are often extended, and online learning has tried its best to help guide students. Also, we can assume that this is an extraordinary circumstance, and therefore, how can we assume that this new grading system would do any better whatsoever without any sufficient evidence that it would do so? My first point is that the new grading system would cause a lower rate of school attendance, and therefore students would learn far less. And this would only further the degradation of the disadvantage of lower income students. According to a report from Clark County, grades shall not be influenced by behaviour and other non-academic measures such as attendance. A study conducted by Johns Hopkins University reported that absenteeism is most prevalent amongst low-income students, and also low-income students are the most affected by this. If these students attended school every single day alone without any new modifications, it would drive up achievement, high school graduation, and college attainment rates. The same study found that students miss school for various reasons: illness, family responsibility, juvenile justice issues. They will also not attend school because of issues such as bullying or safety issues. This grading system is not a solution for these issues, or rather, it doesn't help them at all. This policy is a band-aid to solve the inequity in America, but it won't fix the attendance that many children in American schools face. It will lead to even more disadvantage. This policy takes away the intrinsic motivation to attend school, essentially saying that students shouldn't attend school and don't have to learn. Undoubtedly, this policy is detrimental to students. My second point is that less motivation in the classroom would be, once again, detrimental to students. This new policy adopts a new grading system, which is essentially just pass or fail. A reduction of accurate grading for high achievers and even struggling students can be and will be detrimental to them. All students need feedback to learn from so they can set goals and progress in their learning. A P or W grade wouldn't do this. It doesn't allow the students to strive for, and also it doesn't reflect the hard work that some students put into their work. To allow students to scrape off, just skim through, just so they can get an easy P, does not benefit them. It is detrimental. So, Madam Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, this new policy would lower the rate of school attendance and harm lower income students, as well as take away their motivation, which is, of course, a very important thing to these students, as they are often hindered by their low income. This new grading system would hinder these students socially and emotionally through their well-being, as well as neglecting the need that students have for feedback and goals. Clearly, the new grading policy is detrimental to students. Thank you very much.
the second negative speaker, Lucy Denton.
Good evening, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that the new grading system policy is detrimental to students. We, the negative team, believe that this statement is false. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that the students will lose motivation. However, consider how it makes a child keep trying. If a student misses 4 or 5 assignments at the beginning of a semester, if they aren't allowed to retake or hand them up, imagine how much of their motivation would still be there because they would want to keep on trying. What's the incentive for students to actually keep trying? Giving multiple chances to take the assessments means kids don't give up. The second speaker has tried to say that school attendance will be affected, but as I will be talking to you about the advantage towards low-income students today. Our first speaker has already stated that the COVID-stricken children will be accommodated and that the new grading system supports the distance learning. Today I will be talking to you about 2 points. Now to my first point. The new grading system is more equitable. This is because the new grading system acknowledges the difficulties that many students of low socioeconomic statuses experience. Science Direct states that students from low socioeconomic backgrounds have a higher risk of school absenteeism than others. Also, school policies that focus on school absenteeism adversely affect those from low socioeconomic circumstances and promotes inequality in educational and post-school outcomes. According to the Legislative Council of the State of Nevada, chronic absenteeism is highest in the school district of Humboldt at 23%, and this correlates with a high incidence of poverty at 11% of the population. Grading attendance is therefore an equity issue, as it adversely affects those of low socioeconomic background. Now to my second point. The new grading system promotes reflection and reassessment. This is because education is about learning, and for students who receive a 0 or failing grade, the desire to learn decreases. Students end up believing they're just no good at the subject. If the intention of education is learning, then allowing the students to reflect and reassess where they went wrong, and to maybe even resubmit a task, is therefore helping them. And this is what the grading system does. So, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, by not grading absenteeism, the new grading system is more equitable to students. It also teaches students that an important part of learning is reflection. It promotes a growth mindset for these students. These are all important skills and will result in a population that is more thoroughly prepared for their post-school life. Thank you.
I call upon the third affirmative speaker, Evelyn Greer.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that the new grading policy is detrimental to students. We, the affirmative team, undoubtedly agree with this statement. The negative team has tried to tell you that the grading system would be beneficial for remote learning. And while the pandemic has placed a lot of stress on students, changing the grading system does not immediately lift the stress. Especially in COVID times, students need structure and motivation, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. This new policy does not give them that. The second negative speaker has said that a student missing assignments would gain motivation. But when a child has failed, they do not get the happy hormones. It's science, okay? Whether they retake tests or not, students would fall behind, having a large amount of the curriculum to catch up on. This is detrimental. The negative speaker has tried to tell you that this policy would help students from disadvantaged families or in difficult circumstances that could disrupt their attendance. However, we know that in no way would a grading system fix the issues that students have surrounding their home lives. Putting a band-aid on something so that you can't see the blood may be a short-term solution, but when students are struggling to attend school or participate in class, then there's a problem. As our second speaker mentioned, a study from Johns Hopkins University reported that it is low-income students who benefit the most from attending school every day. This new grading system does not try to get these students to school, and that is what needs to be happening. Of course, there are circumstances where, for example, a student is ill, or they have things to take care of at home, or they might have a learning disability and need support. And that is where the education department steps in to say, okay, let's get you support. This is already happening. If we need this policy because it is not, then we actually need to focus on supporting students to be at school instead. We know that the goal shouldn't just be to get these students to pass, but it should be to get them supported. Changing the grading system will not do this. Our first speaker, Naylor, spoke to you about how the new grading policy doesn't prepare students for their future, explaining that life and work skills such as organisation and time management are vital. She talked about how the policy doesn't set students up to learn the value of failure and teach students a growth mindset. Our second speaker, Ilan, explained that the new grading system would result in more absenteeism and then he informed you of the harm that lack of motivation in the classroom has to students. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, it is clear that this policy is harmful. It is a recipe for students without life skills that does not prepare them for their futures. This policy diminishes the valuable life lessons of failure, and it would result in less school attendance, which is undoubtedly deleterious. The new grading policy is unquestionably detrimental to students. Thank you.
I call upon the third negative speaker, Eva Dimmel.
Good evening, Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that the new grading system in Nevada is detrimental to students, and we, the negative team, strongly believe that this statement is false. The affirmative team tried to say that students will lose motivation. However, our second speaker already stated in her rebuttal to consider how it can make students keep trying. She said that if students miss 4 or 5 assignments at the beginning of the semester and they weren't allowed to retake them or hand them back in, then their whole grade has gone down to an F, basically. And then what's the incentive for students to actually keep trying? Giving multiple chances to take assessments means that kids don't give up. The second speaker also tried to say that school attendance will be affected, but as the second speaker of our team already talked to you about, she stated that the advantages of attendance towards low socioeconomic students. The first affirmative speaker stated that this new grading system does not prepare students for life outside of school. This is wrong because grades, as our first speaker stated, grades are the main source of college jobs, of gaining good jobs and getting into college. Therefore, we need to make this change to make sure that more students don't drop out and never get a good job. And I would just like to remind the affirmative team that we don't agree that the Nevada policy actually states that there will still be a participation grade called a citizenship grade. Our first speaker talked to you about how the growth of COVID cases triggers mental health issues, which CDC states that 26% of Americans suffer from, and how they are intensified due to the pandemic. Her second point talks about how the grading system supports new distance learning and how it lets students demonstrate what they've learned and know. Our second speaker talked about how the new grading system is more equitable. She used an example of how this grading system is more supportive towards people of low socioeconomic backgrounds. She explained that people from this background are more likely to be absent at school because of travel reasons or maybe even caring responsibilities. She summed up by talking about how absenteeism-focused policies promote inequality towards this group of people. Her second point talked about how the new policy promotes reflection and second chances. She talked about how the grade you get affects your desire to learn and the enjoyment towards learning. She gave the argument that if the intention of school is to learn and better your understanding and knowledge of different subjects, then the chance to reflect and look over your work is a good one. As it opens stronger neural pathways, as Open Australia states, it makes stronger neural pathways. That's why study methods like active recall, prolonged recall, and redoing and reviewing notes are so popular. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, from the points we, the negative team, have passed today, this new grading system will help support and further, as well as prepare our students for the future, not just at school. Thank you.
We now come to question time. For the next 3 minutes, teams are invited to take turns to ask each other questions about the debate. That is, the affirmative team will ask a question, then the negative, then the affirmative, and so on. A team is free to indicate if it has no questions. I now invite the affirmative team to ask its first question.
Okay. Hi. I was just wondering, where did you get the information that there will be a grade given for participation?
I found it on the Nevada website. I can show you later if you want.
Oh, that's fine. I was just,
I know the article doesn't state it, but I did a little background.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
It did.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, thank you. Wait.
We don't have any questions. If you guys have another one, you can just go.
Oh yeah, so I was just going to ask, because, so for the second negative speaker, you said that the attendance rate would be bettered by the grading policy, but where was your evidence behind that? Like, did you
did we miss a source for that or something?
Well, I was talking more about students from lower socioeconomic statuses, but I found it like on the Nevada school district, like the Nevada Legislative Council.
Like website or? Yeah, sorry.
The Legislative Council of Nevada.
Okay. Oh, I think we're done. Yeah.
No questions asked.
Right, no more questions from either team? Alright. While the adjudicator finalises the results, I will read this evening's chairman's notices. We are delighted to announce that subject to COVID-19 restrictions, the grand finals will be held at the House of Assembly Chamber, Parliament House, on Saturday the 25th of September 2021. There will likely be a need to RSVP for contact tracing purposes, so please keep an eye out for this information. Topic and side information for the semi-finals will be available on the Debating Essay website from tomorrow morning. Please be sure to check your side and debate time information carefully. Debates will be held here at the same venue next week. We will now wait the adjudicator's results.
Ready to go. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, well done to all of the debaters for reaching the quarterfinals. I hope you have enjoyed the disrupted season of debating and that you've learned a lot along the way as well. We'll be mostly individual feedback tonight, but there's a little bit of a curly bit in the middle there. So to our first affirmative nailer, did I say that right? Yes. Really good definition. So it took us through sort of step by step those terms and gave enough context for us, I think, to understand what the new grading policy was. And then I think in your arguments themselves, they were very well researched. That came through very strongly. And you referenced, for want of a better word, your sources quite well as well, and methodically took us through each step of your thinking. What I would say is, you mentioned at one point Sage Journals. Was that an internet site that you were on?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And it had like a source from a study from.
Yes. So, if I remember correctly, I believe Sage Journals is a journal. This is a very intricate point, but Sage Journals is a journal hosting site, and then the actual information would be in a journal. So at the bottom of that source material, either the name of the study or the name of the actual journal that you were reading would be where the information is from. That's a very minor point, just something to think about, particularly if you're researching for assignments and things like that, is that the internet site that hosts the research isn't necessarily the thing that did the research. Anyway, very minor point, because your research really came through quite strongly tonight and set up your team's case really well from the first speech, so well done.
Thank you.
And to our first negative, Zara. I really liked your focus on sort of how this policy works in today's world. I thought that was a really strong point to lead with for your team, and particularly sort of talking about the benefits of this grading policy. I think you did you miss a little bit of your speech at the end? You seemed to get quite nervous when you heard the first bell. So just try and remember that you've practiced. I'm sure you would have practiced to the, to the time, because I think we did kind of miss that point, some of that second point from you. And just a tip, so with the definition, I guess the most important part when you're a negative team is, are you agreeing or disagreeing with the definition? So lead with that and then tell us why. And I think it was an important point for you to raise tonight as a team, that the sort of attendances and behaviours is still, given a grade. So that was quite important, I think, for your team. But just be wary of when you do amend the definition, you then have to remember that you've amended that for the rest of the debate. So I'll now jump into a little bit of a curly bit. Because the definition was amended, ideally every speaker from then on should be mentioning the definition. So this is our team's definition. Here's why we think it's better than what has been offered by the opposing team, or the affirmative team could also have, in this instance, said, okay, we accept that that is part of the thing, and here's why it doesn't matter, or here's why it's still detrimental. But obviously you didn't know, so that's applicable. So to our both Ilan and Lucy, this interesting research here that came up about the, I assume, correlation between low socioeconomic status and high absenteeism. So I did hear from Ilan that it was a John Hopkins study. Lucy, where did you get that information from?
Like the Legislative Council.
Okay, yep. Sorry, yep, that was answered in question time. Okay, so it was a different study. I just wanted to make sure of that. So I'll start with Ilan. I thought that that's quite an interesting piece of research, and I think you could have talked a little bit more about it, and particularly I think you just needed to highlight the idea that, which was actually well highlighted by your third speaker, that students with from lower socioeconomic backgrounds actually benefit the most from attendance, and so it was in there, but it was that point, which is really the crux of your argument, was getting a little bit lost in some of the periphery, I guess, arguing there. So make sure that that kernel of your argument really comes to the fore, because at times when you were discussing, they're absent for these reasons, that wasn't adding anything to your argument. It was just sort of, it's not filler, it was making it a little bit more difficult to follow. So I think, because and that's why I said to you at the start that I think you needed to dig into that research a little bit more for the audience, because I wrote down, I was unsure whether or not, does low socioeconomic status cause high absenteeism, or is it just correlated? So, do you know the difference between correlation and causation? Yes, yeah. Good. Okay, cool. I don't have to explain that. And I think that's there's quite an important difference there, and it wasn't clear from your speech. That being said, I particularly liked your second argument there as well, about the pass or fail grade being detrimental to both high achieving and lower achieving students. I thought that was well considered at both ends. Following on in terms of this idea of the link between socioeconomic status and high absenteeism, Lucy, you gave us, I guess, the benefits of this policy in terms of that correlation. And the argument that it would be more equitable, this new policy is more equitable. And I thought you did quite well to explain how this policy deals with, I guess, the causes of the absenteeism quite well. You could have gone a little bit further in terms of your second argument in terms of the failures, that sort of lower desire to succeed once you get a failure. And I think the motivation argument as well did get attacked a little bit by the opposition team. And again, I think that might be helped by, as I said to Ilan, finding the crux and of the argument and making sure that is really strong in the structure of your speech. And finally, to our third speakers, to Evelyn. Sorry, I cannot read my own writing. You did a really good job of, I think, rebutting the major points that had been made by the negative team, and pointing out those flaws there. So the grading system doesn't, obviously address anything, any issues that have been directly caused by COVID. Is a worthwhile point, and as had been mentioned by your team as well, what happens afterwards, I think that was a good point for you to stick on. And as I said just before, you really did bring back that argument from Milan to me, because you got to the crux and used that quite well in your rebuttal, which is good to see. One point though, just be wary of context of the debate. So at one point you mentioned, and it was along that same argument, so that's the point where the education department steps in. And I wasn't sure if that was within the Nevada context, or if we'd sort of slipped into an Australian context there. So do be wary of that. And finally, to our third negative, Eva. What I would suggest to you is that you need to go beyond beyond just sort of saying, as my first or second speaker said. That's a really good tool to get into a rebuttal point, but then you need to, in rebuttal, add a little bit more. So you did really well to, again, cover off the major points that had been made by the affirmative team, but you relied, I think, tonight a little bit too much on what had been said by your previous speakers, particularly. So, for example, when you talked about motivation for students who have previously failed, when you sort of just reiterated what your second speaker had said, you didn't then address what the third affirmative had said, in sort of saying, you know, if they are 5 assignments behind, yes, they can still submit, but they're still behind. The grading policy, it doesn't address that problem particularly. And just be wary in your summary of introducing new material through adding examples to what your previous speakers have said. But other than that, yeah, great amount of rebuttal. We just need to hear a little bit more of your personal input in that rebuttal as well. So once again, well done to all debaters. The team that I felt had the stronger case and a little bit more effective rebuttal tonight was the affirmative team. And the debating award tonight goes to Naila.
I call upon a member of the runner-up team to give a vote of thanks.
We'd like to thank Nazareth for hosting the debates and Brighton for giving us such a good one. You guys really deserve the win. So, thanks.
I call upon a member of the winning team to second that vote of thanks.
Hello. I'd just like to say a big thank you to Nazareth, obviously, for hosting, and for the adjudicator, our beautiful chairperson and timekeeper. I'd also like to thank, is it St. Aloysius?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for putting such a good fight up. Like, you had some of us stumped, definitely. Thank you to the audience for coming out and supporting us. You know, it's much better than arguing to a wall. So thank you, and yeah, thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. I now declare this debate closed.
Wait, do we cut?